Comparing fractions. We're going to take a look at three different methods that you can use in comparing fractions. You can change the denominators. This is probably the easiest method right here by cross multiplying. Or you can use what I like to call the duh method. So let's take a look at these. The first method is, in comparing fractions, is to change the denominator. So you'll see we're going to compare which one of these fractions is larger, 8/12 or 5/9. Well, they're kind of hard to compare because one is in twelfths and one is in ninths. Well, what you could do is you could change both fractions so that they have the same denominator. So the least common denominator, or least common multiple, of 9 and 12 would be 36. So we're going to change them both to 36. 3 times 12 would be 36. 8 times 3 would be 24. So 8/12 equals 24/36. 5/9. 9 times 4 is 36. 5 times 4 is 20. Now it makes it easy to compare because you've got 20/36 and 24/36. 8/12 would be your larger fraction. Now an easier method will do the same problem. You can use cross multiplication. And the way this works is we're going to take the denominator here, 12, we're going to cross multiply with 5. So 12 times 5 gives you 60. We're going to multiply 9 times 8, that gives you 72. 72 is larger than 60, therefore 8/12 is larger than 5/9. So that's probably the easiest method. Another method I like to call the duh method. Sometimes you can tell which fraction is larger. For example, when I look at 8/20, I know that 10/20 would be 1/2. So this is smaller than 1/2. When I look at 5/8, I know that 4/8 would be 1/2. This is larger than a half. Since this one is larger than a half, this one's smaller than a half, I know that one's bigger. And that's called the duh method. So let's do a few examples here. This is actually from a classroom assignment. We're going to change the denominators. Now sometimes you only need to change one denominator. For example, on number 1, you've got 14ths and 7ths. We're going to change this one. The least common denominator would be 14. So 7 times 2 is 14. 2 times 2 is 4. You've got 4/14, 5/14. 5/14 is bigger. Again, on the next example, you only need to change one denominator. You've got 27ths and 9ths. The least common denominator would be 27. So 9 times 3 is 27. 6 times 3 would be 18. You've got 18/27. 18/27. Those are actually equivalent fractions. Now the next one, you're going to have to change both of the denominators. And the least common denominator for these two would be 24. So 8 times 3 would be 24. 5 times 3 would be 15. 3 times 8 would be 24. And 2 times 8 would be 16. 16/24 is bigger than 15/24. We'll do one more. Number 4. You're going to have to change both denominators here. Now, the least common denominator would be 24. Let's say I didn't see that and I accidentally changed them to 48ths. That would be fine. You'd still get the correct answer. 12 times 4 is 48. 11 times 4 is 44. 8 times 6 is 48. And 7 times 6 is 42. 44/48 is larger than 42/48. So that's how you can change the denominators to compare fractions. And as I mentioned, this is definitely the easiest method, and that is to use cross multiplication. So here we're going to do 7. We're going to cross multiply. 7 times 2 is 14. 5 times 3 is 15. 15 is larger than 14. 3/7 is the larger fraction. 7 times 2 would be 34. 3 times 11 would be 33. 34 is larger than 33. 2/3 is the larger fraction. Now the next one's a little bit tricky. We'll do, well actually you could just cross multiply. 5 times 8 is 40. 3 times 9 is 27. 40 is larger than 27. 8/3 is bigger. That went through me for a second because they're both improper fractions, but it'll still work with improper fractions. We'll do one more. 11 times 3 is 33. 16 times 2 is 32. 33 is larger than 32. 3/16 is the larger fraction. Now let's practice the duh method. If you look at 3/7, now would that be larger than a half or smaller than a half? It's a little tricky because half of 7 is 3.5 or 3.5. This is less. This would be less than a half. 5/8. Well, 4/8 is a half. This would be greater than a half. This is more than 1/2. That's bigger. 25/50 would be 1/2. So this is less than a half. 6/12 would be 1/2. This is more than a half. That would be larger. 7/12 would be larger. 15/30 would be 1/2. So this is more. 7/14 is also more than a half. Well, this one's you'd have to think a little bit on this one. Now 7/4, this one's just barely larger than 1/2, and this is significantly more than 1/2. That would be the larger fraction. So again, probably the easiest method of the three is to cross multiply, but that's three methods on comparing fractions.